Semi-naked cakes are a popular choice for weddings and baby showers, and with a few tips, they're easy to make. I hope this tutorial gives you the confidence to make a semi-naked cake for your celebration or someone else's. I'm going to make a 2-tier cake, but you can use these same instructions to make a 3-tier cake or just a single standalone semi-naked cake. For tier cakes, I recommend at least 2 inches difference between each tier. I'm using 6-inch and 8-inch pans, and I'm making 3 layers for each cake. This is my perfect chocolate cake, and the recipe is on BritishGirlBakes.com. After baking and cooling, it's important to level cake layers for semi-naked cakes. This makes the cake straight and gives it a neat outline. You can buy wire levelers to help with this step, but I tested one for a tutorial on Amazon Cake Tools, and I don't find it worthwhile. I've put the link for that tutorial at the end of this video. Now, before you start making the cake, there are 2 things to check to set yourself up for success. First, the consistency of your buttercream. It might be less stiff than normal. It should be easy to stir, and your spatula should leave a smooth trail behind in the bowl. Having the right consistency minimizes crumbs pulling off the cake. The second thing, which is really important, is that the cake layers are chilled. Cold cake layers are easier to work with because they're less crumbly than room temperature cake layers, which will make the cake easier to assemble and frost neatly. I wrapped these in cling film or plastic wrap and left them in the freezer overnight, which I find is ideal for semi-naked cakes, but even just 30 minutes is long enough to make a difference. When you have your buttercream and cake layers ready, assemble your second tier. The reason for doing the second tier first is that you're going to touch it when you stack the cake, so you want to give it the most time possible to set and harden in the fridge. This is a thin cardboard cake board with a greaseproof lining. A material you can cut easily is ideal. Start with the board the same width as your cake layers. Spread a bit of buttercream onto the middle of the board, and this acts as glue, so when you press your first cake layer onto it, it will stick to it. Now you can pipe or spread your filling, and I'll spread it for this tier and pipe it for the next to show you both options. Since the cake is cold, you won't pull up lots of crumbs as you spread this, and also the cold cake will chill and set the dot of buttercream down on the cake board, and that will hold the cake securely in place so it doesn't slide around on the cake board as you spread the filling, or the frosting later. Line up the next cake layer so it's directly above the first, getting down to eye level and spinning the cake to check that the sides are straight all the way around, and then add your next layer of filling. I'm using my 4-minute buttercream to fill and frost this cake, but I teach all sorts of fillings and frostings in my Basics of Cake and Basics of Buttercream online courses, which you'll find on my cake school on BritishGirlBakes.com. If the filling is sticking out from the sides of the cake, spread that to flatten it. Once the cake is assembled, if the layers are still cold, you can move straight on to frosting it. If not, put the cake in the freezer for 15 minutes or the fridge for an hour first. I like to start with the top of the cake, spreading the frosting all over and pushing it over the edges to make a neat, sharp angle around the top of the cake later. Smooth the frosting by spinning the cake on the turntable and holding your offset spatula at a 45-degree angle, and then swiping it off the cake to take the excess frosting off with it. Since the cake is on a board the same size as the cake, frosting the sides will be tricky unless you put the cake on a bigger cake board, using a non-slip mat to hold it still. Spread the frosting from side to side around the cake, pushing it up above the top edge so that you can make that sharp angle later. Since the buttercream is softer than you might normally use to frost a cake, this lip would sink down instead of standing up like this, but because the cake is cold, it chills the buttercream quite quickly, and that makes it much firmer as it sits there. Go all the way down to the bottom to cover up the entire cake, and be generous with how much frosting you're spreading on, because although this is going to be a semi-naked cake, by making a thick layer of frosting and then scraping off the excess, you'll minimize crumbs in the frosting, rather than trying to spread the frosting very thinly, which will pull off more crumbs from the cake. Scrape around the cake with a straight-edged cake comb, and to get smooth semi-naked frosting, after every few scrapes around the cake you'll need to spread more frosting over any indents, and then scrape again, which will fill in any imperfections and also scrape off excess frosting, leaving a nice smooth layer behind. For the top edge, push sideways with your offset spatula to push that lip of frosting over onto the top of the cake, and then swipe it off on your offset spatula. Now put the whole cake in the fridge to set this frosting while you make the bottom tier. You'll need a cake drum or another thick, sturdy material for the board at the bottom of the cake, since it needs to support the weight of the whole tier cake. Assemble the bottom tier the same way as normal, attaching the first layer of cake with a dot of buttercream and then alternating between fillings and cake layers. To pipe the filling onto the cake, spoon it into a piping bag with the end cut off, or you could use a round piping tip. Pipe around the edges of the cake and then spiral inwards to the middle, and then use an offset spatula to spread the piped buttercream so that it covers the whole top of the cake layer in a flat, smooth layer. Then place the next cake layer on top. Spin the cake to check that the layers are lined up straight on top of each other and push down to secure the top layer, and then repeat. If you've chilled your cake layers before assembling the cake, it's important to work quite quickly because the filling will set quite quickly and then it won't be sticky. You want to place the next cake layer on top before the filling sets so that the cake will attach to it. After placing the final layer, I like to use one of these spirit levels to check that the cake has a flat top, which is especially important for the bottom tier because you want the next tier to sit level and straight on top of it. You can push down on one side of the cake if it's higher than the other, and it will sink further down into the filling on that side to level the cake. Check the cake from the sides and you can see that my top layer is wider than the other two. It was a test cake for some silicone baking pans, which are also in my tutorial on testing Amazon cake tools. And since it's a bit bigger than the other layers, it's important to trim it so that the sides of the cake are straight. You can do this with a serrated knife like a bread knife. If I didn't trim this, I'd have to spread the frosting on very thickly over the bottom part of the cake to make it as wide as this, to create straight sides, and then the cake wouldn't be semi-naked at all. Once the bottom tier is assembled, if the cake layers are already chilled, you can frost it straight away. For this tier, I'll show you how to pipe the frosting onto the cake. I like to pipe a ring around the bottom of the cake first, since that's the trickiest part to get to with your offset spatula, and then zigzag around the rest of the cake. Then you can use your offset spatula to spread it easily to cover up the whole cake. And since the frosting is already on the cake, as you spread it, it should glide instead of sticking and dragging crumbs with it. To recap my tips for neat semi-naked frosting, make sure your cake is cold so it's firm and less crumbly than a room temperature cake. Check that your buttercream isn't too stiff to spread easily. And use more buttercream than you think you need, which minimizes the crumbs coming off the cake and getting into the frosting. Scrape around the cake with a cake comb to smooth the frosting and spread more frosting over any indents to fill those in. Scrape around again and do more touch-ups as you need them until the frosting is smooth. Tidy up the top edge and this bottom tier will be ready. But don't rush ahead and place the second tier on top yet. Put this cake into the fridge for now. Before stacking the cake, there are a few small steps to do in preparation. Take the second tier out of the fridge, and the frosting should be cold and firm so you can touch it without damaging it. If the cake board is sticking out below the cake, because it's a bit bigger than the cake, trim the cake board now. Since the cake is cold, you won't smudge or indent the frosting as you do this. Angle your scissors so that you're cutting right up to the edge of the cake, so the board is flush with the cake. Now put this cake onto the bottom tier for just a moment and center it, and trace around the edge with a toothpick or an offset spatula to mark where it's going to be eventually. Then put the top tier back into the fridge. The bottom tier needs to support the cake above it, and to do that I like to use boba straws because they're wide and strong and easy to cut to size. Push one into the bottom cake within the line you scored so that it will be underneath the top tier holding it up. Push it about an inch in from the line and push until you feel it hit the cake board. Pinch the straw at the top of the cake, pull it up, and cut at the point you pinched, so that the straw is the height of the cake. Now hold this straw against 3 more straws and trim all of them to be the same length, so that you have 4 identical sized straws. Push the first straw back into the first hole and push the other 3 straws in, opposite the first straw, and then the other 2 opposite each other too, to form a square formation about an inch within the line you scored. Use the handle of your offset spatula to push them right down to the bottom of the cake, and then spread some more frosting over the top, which will act as glue to attach the next cake. Take the second tier out of the fridge and lower it onto the bottom tier, adjusting it so that it's centered on the cake, on top of those 4 straws. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button for a new cake decorating tutorial every week. Now there's an obvious join between the 2 tiers, and you can see the cake board in between it, but that's easy to cover up now. Use some frosting in a piping bag, with the end cut off or with a round piping tip, and pipe a ring of frosting around the cake to cover up that seam. I like to spread it with an offset spatula to push it into the gap between the 2 tiers, and then use a cake comb to scrape around the cake. taking off the excess frosting you just piped on and smoothing it against the cake until it's not noticeable, but it's concealing the cake board and any gaps in between the two cakes. Now you can decorate the cake however you like. There are so many ways to decorate semi-naked cakes. I'm going to use fresh flowers for this one. I'm making little bouquets of flowers that I've already washed and let dry, and I'm wrapping the stems in cling film or saran wrap to prevent any floral juices leaking out. Then I'm pushing each bunch into a boba straw, using the parts that I cut off from the support straws, and I'm trimming each straw so it's just as long as the stems, and then pushing the straw with the flowers into the cake. It's easiest to use scissor blades to push the straws in that last little bit without accidentally poking your fingers into the frosting. Store your semi-naked tier cake in the fridge until transporting it, or until 4 hours before serving it. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, subscribe to my channel for a new cake decorating video every week, and visit my cake school on britishgirlbakes.com for hundreds of cake decorating techniques and designs. Join my Club Plus for access to every mini course, master course, live workshop, and 5-Minute Fridays. Thanks for watching.